SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
Ladies and gentlemen, let the games begin. Prediction markets throughout most of 2025, just a noisy neighbour to legal sports betting, is now here in full force, and it doesn't seem like it's going away at all. FanDuel predicts, DraftKings predictions, PrizePicks dealing with Polymarket, PrizePicks dealing with Kalshi, Underdog dealing with Crypto.com, Fanatics reported to be in talks with Crypto.com too. And by the way, this isn't just cultural or entertainment markets, it's sports too. So the plaster, or the band-aid if you're American, has been well and truly ripped off, and this could shift the industry in entirety. But will the regulators, or the federal law, eventually bring the house crashing down? Welcome back to iGaming Daily, supported by Optimove, the creator of positionless marketing and the #1 player engagement platform. I'm Charlie Horner, and joining me to dissect all things prediction markets is SBC America's senior reporter, Tom Nightingale. Tom, I need to breathe, so I'm just going to let you talk for a minute. There's a lot going on, isn't there?
I mean, we should give a disclaimer at the outset that I don't know if we're going to be able to talk all things prediction markets on one of these, on an iGaming Daily length podcast. But we will certainly do our best. I mean, it seems crazy to think that at the start of this year, from a US gaming perspective, the big topic was like sweepstakes casinos gaming, because my God, stuff moves fast, doesn't it? It seems that pretty much every day there is a new development on the prediction markets front.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that sort of year by year sort of comparison, because it was only, I think we were just about logging off for the Christmas holiday break last year when Crypto.com announced that it was going in to do sports and then quickly rolled back. And we maybe all thought, well, that's that. That was kind of interesting. But throughout 2025, it's just developed and developed and developed to the point now where the big two sportsbook operators are all in, essentially, on prediction markets. So we referenced it on the show on Friday, Tom, when we talked about Flutter's results. But it's worth digging into more. You know, FanDuel, DraftKings, Underdog, PrizePicks, all starting to offer prediction markets, but not just any prediction markets, sports contracts. So what is all this about?
I mean, I would say that, you know, we've had the prologue with this, right? Like the sort of the foreword, if you will, on this issue was, like you said, crypto and Kalshi starting to offer sports contracts sort of end of last year, start of this year, and the CFTC effectively taking a policy of leniency, I guess you could say, kind of just, to most intents and purposes, kind of permitting it. Sportsbooks coming out on earnings calls for Q1, earnings calls for Q2, saying we're monitoring it, we're watching this closely, like, depends on the regulatory status, we'll, you know, assess the pathway forward. And now we're firmly in chapter 1, aren't we? You know, from FanDuel and DraftKings perspective, because obviously there's the two sports betting market leaders, both announcing very firm sports-related plans for prediction markets in the last, week or so, couple of weeks. You know, for them, it's broad strokes, the appeal is obvious, right? Like, when I was saying this on the Flutter podcast we did on Friday, like, when you're like FanDuel and DraftKings and you've basically maxed out kind of what you can do for state-regulated sports betting. You know, okay, Missouri's opening up just at the start of December, but we're not seeing much headway for other states opening legal sports betting. So when you're at the top of that game and there's no sort of room for you to push upwards, what do? You sort of look sideways, don't you? You look for other ways to expand that huge revenue opportunity. And clearly they see this as one, right? You know, we heard, I think, Jason Robbins from DraftKings CEO saying, actually, no, maybe it's Peter Jackson, sorry, for Flutter, basically saying that this opens up sports contracts, federally regulated sports contracts, opens up kind of a whole second half of the market for them, right? You're looking at like California and Texas, the two most populous states in the US, can't offer online legal sports betting there, but kind of seems that as things stand at the moment, at least, this is an avenue they can explore that effectively, does a very similar thing, if not the same thing.
You can understand where they're coming from a business perspective, and leadership's responsibilities to shareholders in terms of getting that sideways market entry into California and Texas. We'll talk about this in much more depth in the second half of the show. My only sort of surprise that they are so willing to go down this route is the regulatory route. And I guess these operators were never going to offer prediction markets with non-sports contracts where they can't be that much money in the corn markets, in what is Trump going to say next. They were always going to go into sports, weren't they?
I mean, yeah, I'm not sure that the prop or parlay potential for the corn exchanges is really that great from FanDuel and DraftKings perspective. I mean, if we didn't think that it was going to happen before, when operators were saying, we're monitoring this closely or whatever, then I think really now with hindsight, like from the moment that Flutter announced like that FanDuel were going to partner with CME Group in August, I think it was, we were heading down this path. Those announcements at the time didn't mention sports. It was very conspicuous that sports was absent from the announcements. It was, we're going to offer things on like the price of gold, like economic markets. Fast forward to now, and, people like PrizePicks making announcements this week. It's not even that they don't even avoid mentioning sports anymore. It's that sports is a central focus of those announcements, and we've seen FanDuel and DraftKings come out and very clearly lay the path forward. Like Flutter even came out and named the major sports that they're going to offer contracts on. It just shows how fast everything is changing here. And I think what's becoming more and more obvious is that any idea that FanDuel and DraftKings looking to step into prediction markets would be with a focus that isn't mostly on sports was fanciful, really.
Yeah. Why would the two biggest sportsbook operators in the country want to take advantage of this new product vertical for anything other than sports, which is what they specialize in, right? But my reservations and my concerns relates to what we've seen in the news and what we've spoken about on the podcast several times in the last year, several times in the last couple of weeks, Tom. With this high profile betting integrity scandals in the NBA, more recently in the MLB. And that's just from sports betting, regular legal sports betting. Well, we don't know whether all of that was taking place in the legal market, but we're led to believe that some of that at least is.
Yeah.
It seems to me that sports contracts are only adding fuel to the fire. What do you think?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because it feels like we know a lot, and yet we know so little really about this at the moment. Kalshi a while ago, they trumpeted this deal that they struck with IC360, which are one of the major monitoring firms, and the monitoring firm that you see mentioned very often now in not only in news reports and regulatory things, but in federal indictments, and all this stuff coming out around like the NBA and the MLB. These integrity monitoring firms do great work in tracking betting activity, spying where there's a sudden rush of activity that wouldn't really add up if you took everything at face value. How that translates to sport events contracts is going to be undoubtedly going to be a big question moving forward. Kalshi says it works with IC360 on its contract, but how exactly? I feel like we don't really know that yet. One thing I will say is with FanDuel, DraftKings, Underdog, PrizePicks, these guys getting into it. All of these operators have existing and pretty long-standing collaborative work with firms like IC360. So the relationships are there, and the tools for sports betting at least are in place. It's just going to be a question of how you translate that from, regulated sports wagers to these yes/no event contracts, and now we're seeing some kind of expansion into more prop style event contracts and that sort of stuff. How it all melds together, I think is going to be a big question moving forward. Yeah, and I mean, we're recording this. I should, I don't want to lift the lid too much, but we're recording this about an hour after PrizePicks announced that they have now struck a multi-year deal with Kalshi, and they're going to offer sports in a range of states. Not every state. We'll get into this more because of their approach will vary from state by state based on their relationships with regulators, and most of these operators, if not all, are targeting these sports-specific event contracts. Mostly, if not entirely, at states where they cannot offer legal sports betting. So it's clear that it's seen as I would say it's seen as an additive opportunity. This shouldn't be looked at as a replacement for regulated sports betting, but clearly these guys feel there is a world of opportunity out there that they can explore through this avenue.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm really eager to see how this integrity angle plays out, because in this world now where you can essentially self-certify markets with the CFTC,
well, yeah,
I guess it just remains to be seen whether that is or can be manipulated in any way. But Tom, we'll take a quick break and then we'll come back because we have to talk about the regulatory and the legal side of this. Welcome back to iGaming Daily. Today we're talking about almost all things prediction markets, as much as we can cram into one episode of iGaming Daily without getting a bit too tired. Tom, another interesting line from both FanDuel and DraftKings is entry into the prediction market space is they are both voluntarily leaving Nevada, essentially, over their prediction market ambitions. What does this tell us? I mean, it might seem like a big line, but it's worth saying that FanDuel and DraftKings don't have the biggest presence in Nevada, do they?
I mean, that is absolutely worth saying. I think that is a very salient point here because, I'm going to get, if I'm not careful, I'm going to get splinters in my backside from sitting on the fence a little bit here. But I would say that in terms of FanDuel and DraftKings and Nevada, it's easy to both understate and overstate the importance of that. I think there is some middle ground because yes, it's a big deal. FanDuel and DraftKings basically saying to Nevada, who, I mean, it might be helpful to run through the basic timeline, but we don't have time. But what I will say is Nevada were one of, if not the first state, as one might imagine, given their, the nature of how they regulate gaming and their gaming market. They were one of the first state regulators to come out and kind of sound the alarm about licensees getting into prediction markets, and particularly obviously with sports. They after FanDuel announced the deal with CME Group, before FanDuel had even mentioned sports, the Nevada Gaming Control Board got some legal representatives of Flutter in front of them at a meeting and basically quizzed them on, are you intending this to become a sports thing? And I remember a general counsel for Flutter saying essentially, right now, no, but it's certainly under consideration. So that was back in August,
And
but
it's worth saying that, sorry, I'll let you carry on your point. I think it's just worth saying that this is probably why you're seeing the likes of Caesars and BetMGM sort of distance themselves from prediction markets, because the Nevada Gaming Control Board have been so vociferous in their oppositions to prediction markets, right?
Well, Caesars and MGM Resorts, and then FanDuel and DraftKings in the other bracket, are very, very different operators, right, in a lot of ways. And certainly as far as Nevada is concerned, because as you referenced, like FanDuel and DraftKings don't really have a presence in Nevada. DraftKings don't ostensibly have no presence in Nevada whatsoever, really. FanDuel have kind of a limited presence. They worked with Boyd Gaming there. They have, I think what's called an information services provider license. But they do not offer regulated online sports betting in the way that they do in 30, however many other states. So Nevada are not like other states. It's not as if New York or Michigan or Pennsylvania have come out and, it's not as if FanDuel and DraftKings have said we'll step out of those markets, because Nevada, it's quite easy to step out of a market, I think, from their point of view, where they weren't really operational anyway. But that's not to say it's not a big deal, because of course it's a big deal. It's essentially FanDuel and DraftKings saying, we choose this new avenue over the potential of expanding our operations in your state down the line. That's essentially what they're saying. They are saying we would rather pursue the prediction markets opportunity than we would remain in the Nevada Gaming Control Board's good books, frankly.
And that is a huge statement in and of itself. Yeah, like you say, less for the action within itself, but as a marker of their intentions, that we view prediction markets as more important than the Nevada market. But let's move away from just Nevada. Let's take a look at some other states, because haven't cease and desist orders been sent to Kalshi basically nationwide? I mean, all these state regulators been saying, hands off our patch, essentially. You can't offer sports contracts in our state. Is this not going to happen to FanDuel, DraftKings, PrizePicks, Underdog, in all of these different states in which they already offer sports betting?
In the immediate term, I would say that probably of all questions, this one is the biggest. Because you're right. Numerous states have issued cease and desist orders to Kalshi. I've lost count of how many, frankly. Kalshi are currently in court with state regulators or state attorney generals in, I think, 4 states, maybe more at this point. It is so hard to keep up. And then, an interesting development we've seen more recently in recent weeks is states issuing public memos to gaming licensees, warning to some extent and to, within varying parameters, warning them about getting into event contracts, obviously, particularly with this focus on sports. And the message we're increasingly seeing from states, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Arizona, some of them, Massachusetts just this week, again, evidence that stuff moves so quickly. And a message that's coming from a lot of these states is, if you offer sports contracts in our state, you are basically offering, this is sports betting and it conflicts with state gaming law, and, your licenses could be in jeopardy. What we're also seeing other states saying, which is pretty interesting and adds to the sort of general inferno that's raging around this at the moment, is some states saying, even if you participate in some way in event contracts in other states, we will be watching you and we will be taking everything into account in terms of your operations in our state.
So that's the most important part of this, isn't it? Because I think FanDuel and DraftKings and the likes, they're saying that we aren't going to introduce sports event contracts in the states where we have online sports betting, but it's whether those regulators act on their words about operating in other states, such as California and Texas.
You could look at this, if you wanted to a certain extent, as FanDuel and DraftKings, and let's not forget PrizePicks, Underdog, URET and Fanatics reportedly looking at it. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that Fanatics are looking at it, because given what's happening, why would you not be looking at it? But the big question is, are these operators effectively calling the bluff of state regulators? It's one thing as a state regulator saying, watch yourself, like, this is a warning, be careful, think about what you're doing. For now that firm steps are being taken and we're actually seeing sports contracts live, PrizePicks now, I think, and Underdog for months have had sports contracts live. Underdog through their partnership with crypto. PrizePicks have just launched them with Kalshi. They intend to launch them with Polymarket as well whenever Polymarket comes back into the US properly, which is a whole other topic. How'd you fancy doing another podcast? These things are happening right now. So now that it's gone from operators looking at doing it to operators doing it, what do states do? If states want to follow up on their warnings by, looking to maybe send cease and desist orders, or I don't really know, I'm not really sure exactly what legal mechanisms are available to them for companies that are already their licensees. But if they want to act on it, then, we could be in for attempted enforcement action. We could well be in for more court battles. It's we are firmly down this road now. But what I would offer as a counterpoint is that FanDuel and DraftKings, in any state with online regulated sports betting, FanDuel and DraftKings make up ballpark 3/4 of the handle, the gross gaming revenue, and extremely relevantly, the tax revenue that states make from online sports betting, which is probably the number one factor for states legalizing sports betting. Let's be honest. Like they say, yeah, obviously player protection, curbing the black market, these are all valid reasons, but they want the money, don't they? They want the tax revenue from it. So to say, in a hypothetical world where a state like Michigan or somewhere takes a hardline stance, says you can't do this, so either you stop offering sports contracts in other states or we revoke your license. A state's going to say that to FanDuel and DraftKings? Are they going to be happy to lose 75% of their tax revenue from online sports betting? That's another side of it. That's another question. I don't think anybody really knows the answer, including maybe the operators. DraftKings and FanDuel say that they've talked to regulators in certain states, and Jason Robbins at DraftKings said that he's pretty confident that offering sports contracts in other states won't affect their standing in legal sports betting states. I think the reality is that nobody really knows, right? And we're going to see what happens as it unfolds in real time.
Yeah, and we've said this several times already today. This is a fast-moving situation. We might come off this recording and see that something else has happened.
I am almost certain that we will, Charlie.
But it does speak to FanDuel and DraftKings' confidence that they are willing to put themselves on the line, to put themselves on the chopping block. There's no surprise that PrizePicks and Underdog are willing to do this. They're no strangers to rubbing up regulators the wrong way. It feels like a long time ago, but really it wasn't. That we weren't talking about prediction markets. We weren't talking about sweepstake casinos. We were talking about DFS 2.0.
Yeah.
And there was the cease and desist letters in several states about that. But the fact that FanDuel and DraftKings, being these huge global listed companies, it does speak to that confidence. But one thing I do want to come on to now, Tom, is this feels like the early days of legalized sports betting, right? This feels like that sort of mass land grab of 2018, 2019, and then after the pandemic when loads of different states went live with regulated and legalized online sports betting after the repeal of PASPA. Do we feel like this is the land grab 2.0?
Yeah, I mean, I think to an extent it is. There's obviously similarities there. The parameters are different, right? Like obviously post PASPA, you had just legalized sports betting and it at state level, and it was, the not only the consensus but the legal, standing was that in most cases at least, like states, it's state regulated, right? So there was this agreement that states get to regulate sports betting. That's about as complicated as that issue gets, apart from when you include tribes and that sort of stuff. But again, how many podcasts do you want to do? Whereas now, obviously, a key difference is that you have state regulated sports betting already. Everyone has seen the effects, both good and bad, of online sports betting being regulated state by state and expanding. So there's that kind of, we have a few years of history behind us in terms of what sports betting looks like. And let's be honest, sports event contracts, to all intents and purposes, is sports betting. But of course, you also have another key point in all of this, which is that the state regulation versus federal regulation. And I think there's definitely a land grab going on. Of course, there is. There's no surprise that people like DraftKings and FanDuel are leading it. There's no surprise to me, at least, that challenger brands, I don't know if you can even really call Fanatics a challenger brand right now. They're top 4, top 3 by a lot of accounts, firmly established in a short space of time. There's no surprise to me that they're looking to get into it. But what a key issue to still be resolved is, let's not forget that the legality of the federal regulation of event contracts is still very much up for discussion in court. And I think that's partly what is emboldening sports books to make this move, is that there has been no, they haven't been told authoritatively that federal regulation of sports event contracts they can't do it under CFTC regulation. And by doing it in states that don't offer state-regulated online sports betting, to me, it seems like they're trying to sort of circumnavigate the issue of maybe federal regulation coming into conflict with state regulation. It seems that they think they can do both, and as long as they set these very clear lines between what is state regulated and what is under the auspices of the CFTC, they haven't been given a sign really that they can't do that at this stage. So while that issue is still being resolved, there's money to be made, isn't there? Let's be honest.
Indeed, there is. Yeah. We should also mention that the United States has only just come off of one of the longest government shutdowns in the Republic's history. So I think the CFTC haven't been working for quite a few weeks. So and I'm sure there'll be a huge backlog of work for them to catch up with. So can you really expect anything to happen in the near term? And I guess to your point, is this just giving the operators so much confidence to take this forward?
Listen, we're at a baby steps stage with the CFTC and everything now, because we're seeing, American Gaming Association, lawmakers, groups, leagues, like all these people have written over recent months to the CFTC, giving their 2 cents on prediction markets and everything like that. The problem is you're not going to get very far when the CFTC as an organization essentially has no leadership in place, right? There is an acting chair, Caroline Pham. She will leave when a new chair is named. All of the other commissioners, there's supposed to be 5. There's currently 1, the acting chair. Everybody else has left, not been replaced. There's no future permanent leader established. It looked like it was going to be Brian Quintenz, who is on the board at Kalshi, was initially Trump's, pick to lead the federal derivatives regulator and everything. Obviously, Kalshi has some, might not be obvious to a non-US audience, but Kalshi has some ties to the Trump administration. So now does Polymarket, with Donald Trump Jr. being involved to some extent with these companies. Now we've had a little bit of progress recently in that Trump's new pick is a guy called Michael Selig, who is a long-standing crypto guy, regulator. He worked at the Securities Exchange Commission as well. He is the new pick for the chair. He has a confirmation hearing scheduled for next week. This week, I guess, by the time this podcast goes out. Quintenz had a hearing, and then he was supposed to have others. He was supposed to have a vote, and it got delayed, and then he got pulled as the nod. So the fact that a hearing is scheduled doesn't necessarily mean anything, which doesn't make trying to assess this situation any easier. But the one thing I think that we can probably say is pretty safe is that at Selig's hearing for his nomination, I think sports events contracts might come up at some point.
Absolutely. Well, Tom, we are way over time. I knew that we would go way over time because there's just too much to talk about. We could have carried on for a lot longer than we did. But thank you ever so much for taking the time to talk about this with me and sharing your expertise with our audience. And to the listeners, thank you very much for listening to today's episode of iGaming Daily. Come back tomorrow to keep up to date with all the latest global gambling news.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.